we long expected, but it's still very bad news. Can you explain what just happened in Missouri?
Yeah, Republicans in Missouri have enacted a new congressional map. They capitulated to Donald Trump's demands and redrew what was already a pretty extreme Republican gerrymander, but they made it an even more extreme gerrymander by essentially dismantling the Kansas City district that Representative Cleaver has represented for some time now. And look, now the lawsuits begin.
And so on that front, can you talk about the legality of their move and whether it does butt up against any laws?
Yeah, so look, my law firm and others are already in the process of suing Missouri over this, and I suspect we're going to see even more lawsuits in the days to come. And look, what they are doing in Missouri is not capturing the nightly news the way they did in Texas. Why? Because what they did in Texas involved 5 seats, and this involves 1 seat. But in many respects, the legal challenges that you will see there are the same that you see in Texas, which is that this is an extreme gerrymander in the middle of an election cycle, paying no attention to what the existing community is in Kansas City, the African American community, but the broader community. This is something, Brian, the business community didn't want. This is something the residents didn't want. The only person who wanted this was Donald Trump. And
Right.
shame on the Republicans in Missouri for doing exactly what the Republicans in Texas did, which is capitulating not to what's in the best interest of their community, not capitulating to what their voters wanted, but simply capitulating to what Donald Trump asked them to do.
In large part, I presume that what happens in Missouri as this thing works its way through the legal system is going to depend on what may very well become precedent in Texas. And I should note for everybody watching that Mark and his team brought that lawsuit against those Texas maps that were enacted at the behest of Donald Trump. And so, can you give some update here in terms of where that lawsuit stands, since that one came first? And so, if there's any hope that that will get decided in their trial court and then likely appealed up to an appeals court, where it will become precedent, like that's gonna be especially persuasive in terms of what happens next in not just Missouri, but likely what we see following that in Indiana and Florida and so on.
Yeah. So, and the Texas thing is important for another reason, which is, of course, that what happens if we are successful in striking down the map in Texas? What happens then in California? But before you answer that, Brian, because I'm curious your thought on that. But what's happening in Texas is the court has set a hearing starting October 1st that'll last 10 days. Now, I have joked with people that a hearing that lasts 10 days, we should call a trial. It's not technically a trial, so I've settled on mini trial.
Yeah.
I don't care whether you consider it a trial or not. If it's 10 days long and you have to be in a courtroom for 10 days with evidence and opening statements and arguments, give me in my legal team that this is close enough that we'll call it a mini trial.
Yeah.
But the judge has set aside a substantial amount of time to hear all of these claims and to issue a ruling. This is another judge where, like what we saw in Utah, where the state says, oh, well, we couldn't possibly do anything now because Purcell or because it's getting too late. And the judges said, okay, well, we'll do it then the first week of October. You're in a rush. Fine, let's get it done now. We'll get it
Right.
done by the middle of October, which, by the way, is also the similar time frame that the judge in Utah set, right, for a new map is middle of October. So we don't know yet in Missouri what that timetable will be, but it wouldn't shock me if we saw shortly, maybe middle of October or November, but it wouldn't shock me if we saw that case move quickly as well. But Brian, I know this is your show to ask me questions, but I got to ask you, what happens if we win in Texas, in California?
I mean, I think you still move forward. The reality is, there was a provision that tied what happened in Texas to what happens in California, and ultimately that provision was removed because it was moot, because Republicans still move forward with this anyway. They don't get credit if a judge decides that what they are doing is illegal or unconstitutional, because they made the conscious decision to move forward with this whole thing anyway. And so if they want to try and undermine democracy, they shouldn't get points because a judge decided to block them. They had the opportunity, knowing full well that California was an opponent on the other side of that thing, was going to do their own map redraw mid-cycle, and they opted to move forward anyway. And so that was their opportunity to take a step back. What happens happens in the courts has no bearing on what these political partisan actors decided to do by moving this whole process forward. And so that time has come and gone for them to relent, knowing full well that California was a weapon that Democrats could wield on the other end of this thing. And so if a judge decides to block them, but California moves forward with it, that's how it goes. Again, like they knew that this was a risk that they shouldered. By virtue of moving forward with this thing, they decided to do it anyway because, I don't know, they wanted a pat on the head from Donald Trump just that badly. But again, you don't get points or credit for a judge being the one to stop you from exercising, moving forward with an unconstitutional power grab.
Right. But I do want to give Brian credit and a pat on the head for what he is doing. Next Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. East Coast time, Brian has organized Yes on 50. This is a fundraiser for the ballot initiative in California. I will be there to do the small part I can do, but everybody needs to know it is Brian Tyler Cohen who is putting together the effort and the event to make sure that the grassroots are engaged in this ballot initiative that hopefully will raise some money. So Brian, it is I don't want to hijack your show and say we're going to put the link in the description below for how people can join that.
Well, I will. I'll put that. I appreciate you saying that. We'll put the link in the post description. Our goal here is to raise as much money as we can because California is a big state. A lot of people don't know about this ballot measure that's going to be on the ballot on November 4th. And the reality is that Republicans are going to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into this state because they know that if they can beat this thing in California, knowing that they have Texas and Missouri and Indiana and Florida and any other Republican states that decide to move forward with this thing, that it's in the bag. That without California as a way to neutralize what Republicans are doing, then they've basically figured out a way to get as close as they possibly can to entrenching permanent minority rule in the House by allowing themselves to redraw all of these maps. And so this is our way to counteract what's happening on the right, the amount of money that's going to flood into this state to persuade people to vote against this referendum. So, the reality is you're not going to have a lot of Democratic donors donating to this effort in the same way that Republicans are because the Trump administration is going to continue to take an aggressive posture against anybody who decides to help Democrats. And so there isn't these big moneyed interests like we're seeing on the right. So it's going to be a big grassroots effort to get people to neutralize the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to pour into the state from every corner of the country. So I will put that link in the post description of this video. So if you want to attend the fundraiser and donate, please make sure to take some time next week. Going back to the Missouri of it all, is there a way in which you can take the arguments that are being made in Texas and basically transpose them into Missouri and then possibly into the other states that do the same thing, whether it's Indiana and Florida?
Yeah, some of the arguments are going to be the same and are very transferable. I mean, remember, one of the arguments in Texas is that this whole notion that has become a given in so many quarters of the legacy media that mid-cycle redistricting is always just perfectly fine. There's no problem. Like, no, don't even worry your little heads about that. Like, that is not necessarily the case. I mean, we're going to learn in Texas whether or not, for example, they're going to get away with mid-cycle redistricting, or whether the circumstances in this time in 2025 are just fundamentally different than when it was approved in Lulac versus Perry, which is a case from 2006, I think, in the Supreme Court. And in Missouri, you're going to have a similar question, like, is this even allowed to be a thing? I think there'll be other claims that will also be that are also going to be similar. I think that the mistreatment of the cities, the mistreatment of Black communities of interest, I think is going to be front and center in a number of these cases. Also in Texas, obviously, the Latino community. The bottom line is judges are going to have to make a fundamental decision. Are they going to allow Republican states every 2 years to look at the election results and then optimize their maps to make sure that they never lose power?
Yeah.
And are they going to allow that to happen because Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. is demanding it? And I keep coming back to this point. When this bill was pending before the Senate, not a single voter in Missouri testified in favor of this bill. Not one. There's no one in Missouri who wants this. I don't even think, to be honest with you, the congressional delegation wants this. The person who wants this is Donald Trump. And so we talk in so many other contexts, Brian, you and I, about Donald Trump seizing power. And we talk all the time about, does he have the power to do it? Does he not have the power? Who's going to stand up? Who's not standing up? And each one of these circumstances is a different context. Sometimes it's a pure political question of whether people are going to stand up. Sometimes we're asking whether judges are going to stand up. Sometimes we ask whether Congress will stand up. But, in some ways, in this redistricting fight, it's sort of all of the above, right? Like, who is going to be the one who says, no, Donald Trump, we are not going to destroy our democracy because that is what you want? We know it's not Greg Abbott. We know it's not the legislators in the Texas legislature. We're now going to see if it's the courts in Texas. Well, in Missouri, we now also know it's not the governor. We also know it's not the Republican legislature. And we'll see if it's the courts there. But Brian, we have to get to a place where someone in a responsible position, some legislator, some speaker of the House, some Senate leader of a state chamber just says, I'm not going to do it. We saw this in the aftermath of the 2020 election, where there were Republicans who were willing to tell Donald Trump, no, we are not going to do the thing you want. We're not going to find votes that don't exist. We're not going to try to invalidate our electors. We're not going to call special sessions. But that seems entirely absent now, Brian. I don't see what Republican governor what legislative leader is possibly going to tell Donald Trump no to anything. And that should scare everyone, not just about redistricting in Missouri, not even just about redistricting, but about democracy more broadly.
Finally, let's finish off with this. What could the prospect of the Supreme Court overturning Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, if they hear this case on October 15th and they decide to rule quickly, how could that impact any potential litigation in Missouri or Texas or the other states that are being considered for redrawing their maps?
Look, I think this Louisiana case, the Calais case, the Section 2 case you're mentioning, that's being re-argued in the Supreme Court, is among the most important cases we have heard in the U.S. Supreme Court in some time. And that is because there is Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act as it strictly applies, right? And you can look at the number of congressional districts and say, or state legislative districts or whatever, and say these are the places where Section 2 drove the final outcome. Missouri, drove the final outcome. For example, Alabama, Section 2 drove a second Black Opportunity District, Louisiana in this case. But there are lots of other places in this country where Section 2 set a baseline culture of how they did redistricting at all. These are places where maybe Section 2 was required, maybe it wasn't, but there was an understanding of the importance of protecting minority voting rights. There was an understanding that that we have an imperfect democracy and we need to do everything we can to ensure that minority voters have the opportunity to vote, have their opportunity for their vote to count, have it not be diluted, and in the cases of districting, to be able to elect their candidates of choice. And what I worry about, which we have seen in so many other areas, including, by the way, in the affirmative action area, where the court strikes one thing down, but it has this ripple effect of saying, okay, not only are we not going to create Section 2 districts, we're actually going to dismantle communities of interest that are not even covered by Section 2, but where you have large concentrations of Black voters. In other words, it's like we go from Section 2 being a crown jewel of democracy to now a witch hunt to find anything that seems to sound like Section 2. So I think it's a very, very important case.
Well, we will, of course, stay on top of that. We'd mentioned that your team is the one litigating this stuff in Texas right now, soon to be litigating this stuff in Missouri. And so for those who are watching, if you are looking for the fighters, if you're looking for the people on the front lines doing the work where it matters most, which is in this case in the courts, one small step that we can all take to support the work that Mark and his team are doing is to subscribe to Democracy Docket. It's the news outlet he founded to focus on everything voting in elections. I use it on a daily basis. If you are not yet subscribed, please do yourself a favor and subscribe. I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.